Today, let's talk about something we all do. Something that, if we're honest, might even be happening right now as you're watching this video instead of working on something more important. It's that thing we all feel guilty about, but also secretly justify to ourselves with 100 little reasons: procrastination. Now, before you get defensive or start feeling judged, I want to invite you to think about procrastination in a completely different way. What if procrastination isn't actually a flaw or a sign of laziness, but rather something our brains have evolved to help us with? Because, believe it or not, procrastination can be a very natural, even healthy response to life's demands, especially in a world that expects us to be constantly switched on, always productive, and perpetually efficient. Maybe, just maybe, there's a reason why we sometimes delay doing the things we know we should do. What if the very act of putting something off is actually setting us up to do it better when the time is right? Let's start by exploring why we procrastinate in the first place. For a lot of us, there's this tension between our immediate, emotional self, the part of us that craves comfort, ease, and a break from stress, and our long-term, rational self, which sees the big picture and knows what needs to get done. Psychologists call this the present self vs future self conflict. When we procrastinate, it's often because our present self is in control, seeking to avoid discomfort and delay stress, even though our future self might actually want to tackle the task. And that's not as irrational as it sounds. Often, there's a reason our present self wants to take a step back. We might need time to process, time to mentally warm up, or even just a moment to let ideas percolate in our subconscious. This is especially true for tasks that require creativity, insight, or problem solving. Ever notice how ideas tend to pop into your head when you're in the shower, or out for a walk, or just doing something completely unrelated to work? That's your brain working things out in the background, in a state psychologists call incubation. It's like giving your brain a chance to marinate in the ideas before you actually have to articulate them. And sometimes that makes all the difference in how we approach a task. But there's more. Have you ever heard of active procrastination? This isn't your typical avoidance behavior. It's more like intentional delay. Active procrastinators are people who intentionally choose to work on a task later, but during that time, they remain engaged with other productive activities. They might clean, organize, or handle other smaller tasks while putting off the big one. And as strange as it might seem, this can actually make them more productive overall. They get into a productive flow on smaller tasks, build momentum, and eventually carry that energy over to the main task. In fact, active procrastinators often report a sense of control over their choices. They're aware that they're delaying one task, but they're also aware that they're accomplishing others. It's as though they've found a way to harness the power of procrastination instead of being controlled by it. Now, let's dive into the real game changer, the idea that procrastination can actually make us more creative. Think about it. When we rush to finish something, we often fall back on our first ideas, our initial impressions. But when we let things simmer, we open ourselves up to seeing them in a new light. Steve Jobs was famous for his delayed decision-making. He believed that by allowing himself more time to reflect, he could see problems from different angles, explore unconventional ideas, and eventually make choices that felt fully thought out and inspired. His ability to resist the pressure to decide quickly led to some of Apple's most innovative products. And it's not just Jobs. History is full of inventors, writers, and artists who understood the value of taking their time, of letting ideas mature. So if you're the kind of person who likes to sleep on it before making a decision or finishing a project, maybe you're not procrastinating, you're giving yourself time for brilliance. But here's where it gets really interesting. Often, when we procrastinate, it's because the task itself feels overwhelming. Maybe it's a report, a big project, or even a conversation we're dreading. It's natural to avoid things that make us uncomfortable or anxious. But this is where self-compassion comes in, a concept pioneered by Dr. Kristin Neff. When we procrastinate, we often feel guilty, ashamed, or even frustrated with ourselves. We tell ourselves that we're lazy or that we'll never get anything done. But what if we chose, instead, to be gentle with ourselves? Research shows that people who practice self-compassion are better able to cope with procrastination because they don't get caught in a cycle of guilt and self-blame. Instead of beating themselves up, they're able to recognize, hey, I'm struggling with this task, and that's okay. This simple shift in mindset can actually make it easier to start the task, because we're no longer sabotaging ourselves with negative self-talk. There's also something called the procrastination paradox. It's the idea that sometimes doing something later can actually help you do it better. Think of it as strategic delay. By intentionally postponing a task, you give your mind time to gather information, make connections, and approach the task with a fresh perspective. Studies have shown that when people procrastinate in a controlled, intentional way, they often end up performing better, especially on creative or problem-solving tasks. This doesn't mean putting things off indefinitely, of course, but rather giving yourself permission to wait until you're in a better mental space to tackle the task. So maybe, just maybe, procrastination isn't the villain we've made it out to be. Maybe it's a way for our minds to protect us from burnout, to give us time to process and reflect, and to approach our tasks with a clearer perspective. It's not about avoiding work. It's about finding the right moment to dive in. As we wrap up, here's something to consider. Procrastination can be an opportunity for self-reflection. Next time you find yourself putting something off, instead of panicking, take a moment to ask yourself why. Are you feeling anxious about the task? Are you afraid of failing? Or maybe, just maybe, your mind is asking for a little more time to get things right. And in that moment of self-awareness, you might just find a new way forward, a way that honors your need for creativity, your need for reflection, and your need for growth. And hey, if you're watching this video instead of doing something else, that's okay too. Sometimes giving yourself a break is exactly what you need. Just remember, you're not alone, and you're not lazy. You're human. And sometimes, the best way to be productive is to give yourself permission to procrastinate, to pause, and to come back stronger. If you found this perspective helpful or even a little comforting, let me know in the comments below. Share your own experiences with procrastination, or just say hello. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ready to see more videos that help you live smarter and more compassionately, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. Thanks for being here, and remember, sometimes giving yourself a little grace is the most productive thing you can do.